Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Janelle Belgrave. I'm an astrologer, acupuncturist, and clairvoyant intuitive here in New York City. And today I'm joined by a dear old Twitter friend of mine by the name of Jenna, who is a psychotherapist out in LA, and she is also a budding astrologer and tarot reader. And today we're coming on to talk about JK Rowling. Because randomly I was looking through some old tweets, and because Miss Rowling or Rowling, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, has been in these Twitter streets being really transphobic and turfy and just generally a big bully. She has embodied herself as Dolores Umbridge, I think. Went back in time, looked at some tweets, and me and Jenna had been talking about the fact that we felt like she had some issues with women. And this was way back in 2020, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And so recently, I saw a YouTube video where someone was breaking down the majority of her popular female characters and why it kind of proved the idea that she had issues with women, even in her literature. So I came to Jenna and was like, hey, do you want to talk about this and look at some charts? And she was like, yeah. So here we are. So, Jenna, you have the floor if you want to chat to the public.
Well, hello, everyone. No, I was just reflecting on our previous talks about it, and I also went down a rabbit hole and found a similar Reddit thread of outlining why she kind of idealizes motherhood and vilifies like single women and that sort of thing as well. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah. So I think last week we got together just to look at her chart a little bit, and we thought we would discuss it with you guys. But, what we talk about is not to say that this is for everyone who has a similar chart to hers, right? Everyone has different life experiences and things of that nature. But we just thought it was very curious how someone can go from being a beloved author of children's books to someone who is kind of damaging her reputation and also causing a lot of harm across the scale. So her most recent kerfuffle has been over the course of the Olympics, where an Olympian boxer who actually won the gold medal, I believe her name is Iman Khalif, was targeted. And after an Italian boxer said that she had never been so hit so hard in her life, um, people started to question Aman's gender and whether or not she was a cisgendered female. And it just kind of exploded into a big kind of transphobic bullying spree for about 2 weeks straight. Iman went on to win the gold medal, and now in the aftermath, she is deciding to sue, I believe, JK Rowling, Elon Musk, and a number of other people for the abuse, the cyberbullying that she experienced during her time in France. And because French law has become a little bit more stringent about online bullying and such, I think she might stand a chance in terms of getting some justice, but we'll see. And we might pull up her chart too if we can. I don't think we have a birth time, but I think there's some interesting synastry between those two. But yeah, that was the origin story of this whole video. This is how astrologers function. We're like, what's going on? Let's look at some charts.
Explain.
What is this weird thing that is happening? I'm very curious. Let's look at what the planets have to say, and usually there's a story. So I think we're going to go backwards in time just to get some history or some context for JK's like highs and lows throughout her life, and then I think we're going to get to present day and look at what's happening and what might happen as we're going forward. Because as we'll see, JK has a very big Virgo stellium, and we have some South Node eclipses in Virgo coming up pretty soon, which might be the thing to jostle her out of her fugue state of just being Dolores Umbridge.
I think Dolores Umbridge is like South Node Virgo to a T, right?
Like it's just like this really kind of vicious, nitpicky rules, perfectionism. Like if it doesn't fit this standard, then it needs to be X'd out. And I think that's what we've been seeing JK do, more or less. It's just been unpleasant to anyone who doesn't fit the feminine standards that she is upholding, apparently. I don't know. So, Madame, if I may share my screen.
Of course. Do I need to give you permission?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, let's see. I figured that out last time. Now I'm, oh, okay.
Got it.
I think so.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Excellent. So I'm going to share my screen and let's get to some charts. Okay. Okay. And here we go. So we can see JK Rowling was born July 31st, 1965 at 9:10 p.m. in Yate, England. So Miss Rowling is a Leo sun, an Aquarius rising, and a huge stellium of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planets in Virgo,
Mhm.
all opposite Saturn. So right now she is going through a Saturn return, which is very interesting in my opinion. Um, but yeah, did you have any thoughts initially when you saw this chart, Jenna?
Um, yeah, as a psychodynamic therapist, I'm always looking at the mother and the father and the trauma. So,
Mm-hmm,
uh, it definitely was looking at the quality of the moon, the wide conjunction with Pluto opposing Saturn and Chiron. Um, and I think that's what we originally were kind of focusing in on 4 years ago or so, of just um, the ways in which I would assume her relationship with her mother was strained, to say the least.
mm-hmm,
Um, in some of the research I did, it seemed like she actually idealizes her mother a lot. So
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
I would think that she's kind of disowned any of the discomfort in the relationship and projected it possibly onto her father, who seems like she has a much less stunning relationship with. And with the Sun square Neptune, I could see that as being a relationship that has a lot more projection in it.
mm-hmm. So, I mean, like you were saying, there's this Saturn Chiron conjunction. It's opposite the moon. The moon is with Pluto. So there is a lot of intensity, I think, for her, like you were saying, around her mother. Like you said, whether or not it's idealized or not, or if the relationship was healthy or not, we don't know because I think JK's mother died around her first Saturn return, if I'm not mistaken.
I think
So,
it was 24 or so, or
oh,
maybe
maybe.
94,
Mhm.
I forget. You want me
So
to?
if it was between the eight of the years of like 93, 94, or 94 and after, that probably would have been around her first Saturn return. So this whole story of Saturn opposite the moon probably would have been very much highlighted at that time.
All right.
Saturn and Pluto being the loss, right?
The
The denial.
the Gemini rising fact checker in me confirmed it was 24 years old. Yeah.
So she was 24 when she passed?
Yeah, 1990.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, interesting. So it wasn't a Saturn return, it was actually a Jupiter return, no?
Yeah,
Interesting. Okay, Jupiter is still a part of that story though, because
right.
Jupiter hits the moon and Saturn by so this is actually a T square technically in
Yeah.
this chart. A little bit wide, but I think it still counts.
I think
So there's definitely a story here.
hmm
And it's interesting because we know that JK has written a whole story about being orphaned, more or less.
true.
The loss of parents. It seems to be a very big theme in her most popular book, Harry Potter, where Harry lost his parents and numerous characters have lost parents in
Mhm.
some shape or form. A lot of death in that book. Um, so there's something to that, I think. I'm of the belief that creatives, whether they're writers or actors or musicians or whoever, I feel like their art is always reflective, usually of their own life experience or the things that they're working through. So it wouldn't surprise me if this
Yeah.
story around parenting or mothering obviously came into her art because, it's a part of who she is. And
Mhm.
so are those books. Okay. So yeah, there are some intense things with the woman in this chart. Moon Virgo plus Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter, there are a lot of feelings that are going on here. But I think what we were talking about the last time was the fact that all of this Virgo energy is ruled by this Mercury in Virgo.
Right.
And of all her planets in her chart, if we were to rank them, This Mercury in Virgo, I believe, is the strongest planet, even stronger than the Sun in Leo.
Yeah.
So this little Mercury has a lot of power. And
Mercury.
we know that Mercury in Virgo is a strong placement. It's almost superpowered in that placement, but it's all about kind of separating information, kind of teasing out what's important or what is useful, more or less. Now, that being said, you know, that's a great quality to have in terms of, writing books and like building universes as she has done, but it may not always be useful in things like relating well to people because maybe it's a little bit too discerning. Maybe it's a little bit too critical. Maybe it's looking for a perfection that doesn't quite exist.
And it put it in the 8th house, and that just adds to it. Yeah, for sure.
So the eighth house having some shadowy connotations, some darker elements. Sometimes pain and trauma can exist in the eighth house, sometimes death, sex or intimacy, taxes, any kind of intimate relationships with people, how we merge with other people, how we feel close to others can be in the eighth house. Anything else from the eighth house you want to mention, Jenna?
Just other people's money, resources.
Assets of
It could be the
others.
cult, even the Harry Potter universe. And she says she doesn't believe in magic, but she wrote this whole world about it, which is
Hmm,
interesting to me.
that's interesting. I did not know that. That's very interesting. Yeah, but also the things that, are kind of difficult for us to kind of deal with too, I think.
Right.
And I think because she has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planets in this house, um, says something to that. And the fact that it's all opposite to this Saturn, there are some challenges here for her. And maybe her lack of belief in magic is because there's been so much traumatic things in life,
Mhm.
possibly.
Yeah.
Maybe, a lot of times people have eighth house placements. There's this element of you use your hardship in a way to help heal others. Your pain is not just yours, it could be something that can be used in the public. And because she also has the moon and Venus back here, I do think that through her art, her literature, especially with this Mercury back here, and also Mercury rules over her fifth house too, with that Jupiter, through
Mhm.
her art, through working with children through her art, she was able to kind of transmute not only her own grief and pain and whatever shadowy stuff exists for her, but also probably gave a lot of light to a lot of young people around the world at the
Mhm.
same time. You know, am still a Harry Potter fan. The books aren't perfect. So it's not about that. But in terms of what they gave to me when I was reading them, there was enjoyment in there. There were opportunities to process grief and loss and shame and all the different things that the characters went through at those particular moments in time that I think are important. So, for all of the things that JK is going through right now, I don't want to diminish the place of her art in the global experience. I think they're important. Otherwise, I don't think they would have been as impactful as they were. They do have their place, but I don't think that means that she can't be criticized or the work can't be criticized or critiqued in the aftermath.
100%.
You know,
Yeah, I wonder too if that strong Mercury speaks to the ability to both write about it, but still maintain the skepticism.
mm, hmm some level of detachment as well.
Mhm.
You know, yeah. So this Mercury is in charge of all of these Virgo planets, and it's also in charge of this Jupiter,
Mhm.
and by default too, is kind of in charge of everything else in the chart too. Because Saturn goes to Jupiter, Jupiter goes to Mercury. Mars goes to Venus, Venus goes to Mercury. Neptune goes to Mars. It's just
Yeah.
so Mercury is the guy and the sun, right? So I would think this makes for a very intellectual kind of experience of life where it may not leave a lot of room for empathy at
Right.
times.
Well, that's a good point because one thing I always tell my clients is like when you make decisions, we don't actually want to use the mind to make decisions because the mind is a great resource for synthesizing information or gathering data. Uh,
Mhm.
But lawyers use logic all the time to battle two different sides of the same case. And so your mind really can kind of get lost in, what actually could be right according to maybe your gut or your heart.
Hmm. Yeah, like the law is cold,
Hmm.
right? When I think about Libra or justice, it's the only zodiac sign that is symbolized by an inanimate object,
Right,
scales, you know. And JK does have Mars in Libra, which, I think too can speak to the fact that she's using the internet and her platform to kind of on behalf of Venus, because it's Libra, ruled by Venus. So women, like I'm fighting on behalf, for women and women's rights and what have you, but it's also from this place of being almost overly rational.
right.
um it's this and
It
this
dictates
only.
rationally.
Yeah, like it's only this in
Hmm.
this box that I've created as how these rules should go, and this the way that it's been synthesized down. Womanhood is only this,
Right.
and if it falls out of this, then it must be incorrect.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think a lot of her fight lately or argument has been that, what has it been like, somehow trans women are, what is it, are they skipping out on the fight of being a woman? Like what is, I'm forgetting what it is that she feels like is the main issue. Like,
Yeah, something about how they somehow have sort of privilege from being assigned male at birth and then are stealing our struggle sort of thing. Yeah.
yeah. And I don't know if I understand that argument per se. I think we were trying to make sense of it last time, where it's just like you have opted out of the pressures of being a woman up until a certain point, and now you get to enjoy all the benefits. So I'm just like, where are the benefits?
Right.
But
And we know trans women are killed at a
alarming rate.
astronomical rate. It's not
Yeah. So it's just like they're choosing, they feel in their soul and their body that this is what and how they want to identify because it feels right, right? Because existing in the male body just feels completely wrong,
Mhm.
right? I think for either gender making that transition, it must be a huge choice and challenge to do,
Right.
you know? So I'm not sure if I understand, like they're taking over for, or they're taking space. And I'm like, what space? Like I
Yeah. I mean, now that you mention it, I like even thinking of the moon as the body with the
mm,
connection to Pluto, the opposition to Saturn and Chiron. I wonder what she even feels like in her body, like this idea of the
mhm,
body and
mhm.
like for trans people to feel like they're in the wrong body and like what is her experience with that? It just kind of came to me as a point of curiosity.
It's true. Like you said, the moon can talk about the body. Also, the second house can have some connotations to that too. Um, First house too, to an extent, and she is an Aquarius rising with Saturn as the ruler of the chart. So I'm wondering how safe she's felt in her own body, like you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's a very good point. Maybe even the criticism of her own body. Maybe she received critique
Right.
or, harassment or abuse for being how she is in her physical state as a woman, which, a lot of us go through, whether no matter what generation you've grown up in. And I was reflecting on this too. We grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. And it's just like looking backwards through time and looking at how female celebrities were treated in the public eye, for their body, if they
Mm-hmm.
were thin enough, or if they were overweight or fat, or and this was not even the internet age at that point in time.
Right.
The internet was coming up, but we were still, TV, magazines, and just thinking about the images that we were receiving about what it meant to be a woman or to be the right kind of woman.
Mm-hmm.
What you had to look like. You had to be tall, you had to be skinny, you had to, look a particular way, right? I think the one that comes to mind the most is Kate Winslet when she was in Titanic,
Yeah.
and how people thought she was chubby or fat. And now when I look at her, I'm like, in what universe?
Yeah.
like she looks like a healthy young woman, but imagine, that's the kind of messaging that you're receiving. And then in today's world, now we have social media and the internet, and now we're also coming up against filters and AI and body modification. I think all of this stuff is kind of reactivating or continuing this really toxic thing that we have about what it means to be a woman in our bodies and feel safe and comfortable and not be at the mercy of this barrage of constant, you're not good enough, you're not the kind of woman or girl that we, do all these things to be better, but it's never enough.
Totally.
Right. So I wonder if this is re-stimulating some stuff for JK, as she's having her Saturn return and it's activating all of this stuff all over for her again,
Mhm.
plus Neptune.
Right. Even, yeah, Neptune, even through her second, I'm curious just because, Gen Z, they are doing like full skin routines at a younger age than we were ever thinking about it. They're getting plastic surgery younger than the averages. And so, yeah, I do wonder how Neptune and Pisces is kind of also fed into this whole sort of thing.
Hmm. Actually, this is her progress. Let's take a peek real quick at her transits, and then I guess we can go backwards a bit to
Yeah,
look at some of her history. I think would be kind of fun.
totally.
So here is JK's chart in the center, and on the outside is what's happening in the sky right now. So as Jenna was saying, that we have Neptune in Pisces at the last degree of Pisces. It is retrograding backwards, but it's been going back and forth over her natal moon for some time now. And
Mhm.
I'm very curious if this has been stimulating a lot of this disillusionment or confusion, or, trying to figure out what's going on with herself,
Right.
honestly. Um, we, unfortunately, as a public, just seem to be involved. Where this might be a better conversation for her and her therapist.
Right. I think we said that at least 10 times last time we talked. Go to therapy, people.
It's like, we don't need to be involved in this, man. And it's funny, in the sky right now, it's Venus is on top of that moon.
Yeah.
So, and it's funny because she just came back into the public eye, I think yesterday or the day before, after taking about 2 weeks off.
Yeah.
And people were suspecting it was because Iman Khalif had come out and said that she was going to sue her.
Mm.
People were thinking, oh, maybe she's gotten the hint that she should stop, but now she's come back and said, no, no, I doubling down.
Yeah. Also, the Mars Jupiter Saturn square was all over her stuff too.
Yeah, let's point that out. Give me a second. So we recently were just coming out of, barely, this Jupiter Mars conjunction in Gemini, which she's also had Mars crossing her Jupiter.
Hmm.
So we've had this, and then we've also had Saturn returning as well. So all of this very mutable energy has been pumping this eighth house up, more or less.
Hmm.
So something's being whipped up for JK.
Right.
We don't know the exact picture. We can speculate, of course. And of course, everything that we're saying is alleged and for entertainment purposes
Yeah.
only, of
I
course.
am entertained.
And hopefully you guys are entertained. But, there's something going on here, especially I think with Mars and Saturn, that is just driving her a little bit over the edge, where she can't seem to stop. And is really just going into a very bullying type situation, because she doesn't know Iman Khalif from a ham sandwich. So why so why use your 14 million plus Twitter platform to go at her like this?
Right. I mean, the tweet you sent me this morning, I was just like scanning her whole timeline. I didn't realize how bad it was, how focused she is on this whole turf war, literally. Turf
It's
war.
pretty intense.
Yeah.
Anything else about these transits that you want to discuss? I mean, we can always come back to them, but
I mean, yeah, she's having her Saturn return, Jupiter's about to return, and Pluto's coming for her first house ascendant. It just seems like
Hmm.
She's in for it for the next few years.
Yeah, I we looked at this last time, and it doesn't look like it's going to be an easy ride going forward. Um, she has the benefit of being very well moneyed.
Mm.
So unlike the most of us, if something like this is happening to us, we'd probably feel it in a very deep financial way too, possibly, but I'm not sure if that's going to be the case here. But who knows? We don't know. But yeah, I think let's maybe go backwards. Because I'm thinking, do you want to start with her mother's passing, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go backwards in time.
While you're pulling that up, I'm also noticing that Uranus has been trining the moon, which is interesting.
Oh, has it?
Mhm.
All right, so I'm gonna do a tri-wheel, and we're gonna go back to what? 1990?
Yeah. See if I have the exact date.
So 1990, and if we get an exact date, we'll pull that up too. But just looking at what was going on in her chart, because sometimes that can give us some clues.
Yeah. It was December
Um,
30th, so it was pretty late. It was almost as late as you could get, 90.
December, December 30th. Wow, isn't that Voldemort's birthday?
Ooh, isn't it?
Isn't it? Or is it December 31st? This is when she's, I
Mhm.
don't believe in magic. I'm like, I don't know if I believe you. I know she's done astrology. There has been some data or evidence of her doing an astrology, like natal book for someone's baby years and years ago. So, she picked character birthdays and everything, and they fit the characters pretty well. So
Yeah,
I don't
Voldemort's
know,
birthday is the 31st. You were right.
31st. So yeah. So at that time, let's look at her progressions first, I think.
Sure.
So at that time, she was coming into a new moon at the time of her mother's passing.
Mm-hmm.
The moon was just about to move into Virgo. So new moons for us and progressions are talking about a new chapter. It's usually a time of endings. When you think about the new moon out in the sky, think about, there's no light in the sky. It's completely dark. So it's kind of a time where we start to plant new seeds for ourselves. And that hopefully in 14 years' time, when the moon culminates into a full moon, hopefully we'll see the benefits of whatever we worked on during or beginning at the new moon and going forward, right? And I think 14 years after 1990, what
4.
2004,
Mhm.
right? So we're pretty sure we know for a fact that the seeds that she planted
Right.
after this point did manifest into something really amazing for her life, right? She wrote a best-selling series of books. They became movies. They became what theme parks and merchandise and you name it, right? And here we are standing 30 plus years later from this new moon, and we know that her life turned out relatively well. So that's one thing. Um, anything
Also,
else? Go ahead.
well, I think we talked about right after her mother died, content warning for anyone with fertility challenges, but she did have a miscarriage, and that also kind of both of those losses in conjunction kind of inspired a lot of the first book. So I would imagine the moon was probably even more exacting to the sun, like around that time as well. So that's an
Got
interesting
Mm-hmm.
timing for this new chapter.
For sure. Because a lot of times with the new moon too, it's like clearing space in life to
Mm-hmm.
start that fresh chapter. So
Right.
there tends to be a lot of loss or endings around this time where, it's kind of like you have to clear the field of your old life in order to have the space to even begin planting new things. But, these are just words, right? In reality, when you're going through this, it doesn't feel like a new beginning. It feels like your whole world is falling apart,
Totally.
right? So it's good to remember to practice grace and kindness to ourselves and others when we're going through things like this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In the transits, we had this huge Capricorn stellium going on. So we
Yeah.
had the Sun, Uranus, Neptune, Venus, Saturn, and the North Node The North Node had just moved into Capricorn, it looks like at this time. This would have been inside of her 12th house. So I would think this would definitely have been like a dark night of the soul, right? A very isolating time. It's all in the sign of Saturn, and Saturn was in its home sign. So it was kind of probably felt very unrelenting. And Venus is there too. So, gosh, and where was the moon? The moon was in Gemini. Okay. It probably would have felt like, wow, there is no love in the world right now.
Right. And it's all in her 12th house too.
Her 12th house,
Yeah.
right? I will say, I think it's important to remember sometimes the 12th house can also be a very creative house. There's a lot of spiritual connotations of like receiving inspiration,
Right.
whether through spirit or your imagination or the unseen world as well. So I would imagine, the very early sparks of what would eventually become her novels might have been planted around this time too, right? Because it's, if anyone has gone through grief, especially through loss of a family member, grief can be very clarifying. It's like it shocks you into realizing what's important and what's not. And it can be very disorienting for a while, where you're just like, none of this matters. So, what am I doing? But it also leaves room for a lot of, I think, spiritual information or inspiration to come through too. And of course, the South Node on the opposite side being in Cancer, can be very literal as like the loss of a maternal figure, as Cancer is ruled by the moon. Anything else about this chart that's standing out to you?
I'm still stuck on what you just shared and thinking about like the collective unconscious and that sort of Jungian framework of like where this story and inspiration could have emerged from, because Uranus, Neptune, and Saturn were in there for quite a long time, almost at least Uranus and Neptune were in there probably the whole time she's writing the book, the first book.
The first book was released in what, 97, I believe?
Yeah, let me look.
Yeah. So
Yes, correct.
want to fast forward to then, or do you want to pick up on any other points before we get to the books?
We can always come back. Let's follow the
Let's follow our noses, huh? Let's follow our impulses. All right, so let's go to 97. So I don't have the exact publishing date on me, being a bad astrologer. Don't mind me. But things have moved. Let's look at the progress chart again. Of course, astrology can be very literal. So remember when her mother passed, 7 years had gone by since then. So, 7 years is pretty important in astrology because 7 is Saturn's favorite number. So think of it as in series of 7, Saturn moves to different angles of the chart, right?
It was June 26th, if you cared to be exact.
Let's be exact, because we're going to be Virgo today. June
Virgo
20th.
season. Virgo
season. Happy Virgo seasons. And the seasons of Virgos, all of yous, happy birthday. So Saturn works in cycles of 7. So we know that at the time of her mother's passing, Saturn was in Capricorn. And by this time, he should have moved into the sign of Aries. This is where he is in the chart, which is her third house. Third house has a lot to do with communications, with schooling, with young people, with dexterity skills, with how we vocalize, type, use instruments, use our minds, use our voices, all the different ways of communicating can be the third house. Also, local travel too can come through the third house as well. So yeah, Saturn said, all right, well, you've been doing all this work on these books. Why don't we put something out into the world? Right. And I think at first the book wasn't a hit. It took some time for it to get going.
I think it didn't really kick off till it started getting published in the US.
Interesting. I don't know if we're going to come back to this topic, but I feel like I've seen some media recently about, especially in social justice work, talking about how the Harry Potter books definitely appeals to a certain section of the U.S. population and why it took off, especially around young white boys,
Sure, yeah.
right? So that might have been the initial fuel. That's not to say these books haven't been enjoyable to other people, but
Right,
there is a certain politic to the initial audience and why, right? So if I can find some of that stuff, I'll definitely bring it back up because I was just like, fascinating. I never even considered that.
right.
So yeah, go ahead.
Just the US having the US chart has the Aquarius moon and she has the Aquarius rising. So maybe there's some way that she speaks to our collective psyche.
I believe she does, quite frankly. It's yeah, I'm sure there's a deeper conversation there for us to have for sure. Okay, so Saturn was going through her third house. Great, 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 great. In her progress chart, the moon have moved into Scorpio.
Yep.
Okay, in her
And
10th house.
mhm.
Okay. But I think one of the more important things about this moon was that the fact that it was going to be moving off into Sag. And I think Sagittarius has been very important for her, and we'll see that a little bit later in terms of a lot of those Sagittarian themes of like television, radio, film, broadcasting, podcasting, publishing, getting things out into the world. So I would, if we could find the date in which things really start to kick off for this first novel, it wouldn't surprise me if it happened probably when this moon moved into Sagittarius, probably by the end of that year or going into 1998, things really started to pick up for sure. Um, Also, the nodes out in the sky were in Virgo and Pisces, but in the inverse of what they're going to be now.
Good point.
So a lot of the times with the North Node, when it's going over our personal planets like this, typically it talks about a time of increase,
Hmm.
things coming to us. I hesitate to say good luck because with the nodes, anything can happen in a way. It's more about the balancing of things. But if you consider the eighth house being the house of other people's money and other people's resources, then I would think this was the beginning of a phase in her life where people were giving her a lot of money or starting to give her that money. Now, I don't know what her book advance was,
Hmm.
but I don't think that was it entirely. And I think I've also, you said something?
Yeah, even just thinking about like we have the benefit of being able to look back and know where she got to, but back then for a single mom, even just it struggling with poverty, even just getting a book deal in general must have felt like the entire world to her, I would imagine.
For sure. Yeah, because I believe at one time she might have been sleeping in her car at one point in time. And I definitely think her early story, single mother, and like I think she was teaching English at certain points, I think in Portugal or Spain, if I'm not mistaken. So there was definitely a rough start,
Right.
but she was still writing this book in the in-between moments of all of this stuff, right? Which I can't even imagine. Like this is where I would give a lot of credit to these Virgo planets and being like, I'm going to work regardless of what's going on and not being so easily fell or even emotional at
Hmm.
times about how difficult things were, right?
Right.
So this is where Saturn can be very helpful in like, you know what, you just have to be firm and tough with yourself in
Right.
a way that allows you to do the work that's necessary to get ahead at some point in time.
Totally.
Um, but
One
yeah,
one other tidbit was I heard that she took out a loan for like $30,000 or so just to finish the book. So bringing in like taxes and other people's resources to kind of fund this writing project. Um, it's interesting with the progressed sun in the eighth house and that sort of thing.
and I think I've mentioned to you last time, sometimes we see configurations of Pluto and Jupiter quite a bit,
Yeah, yeah, you mentioned.
or Jupiter, Pluto, Venus quite a bit when people make large amounts of money. So if you check the charts of millionaires and billionaires at times, you will see definite clear configurations towards those planets. And she does have it. But I think in her case, it was activated through progressions and transits versus, being born into it per se. So it's like the promise of it was there, but it needed to come about through external forces, basically.
Mhm. Hopeful
Um,
for all of us who didn't start off with this silver.
right? There's some hope for us because, we may not be millionaires and billionaires, but maybe comfort is in the stars for us, hopefully, And I think that's something that everyone wants. It's just like, I just want to feel comfortable and at ease with having enough, right? Like not having to worry, basically. Um, yeah. Anything else about this? Jupiter was going through her first house, so usually that's a nice little boost as well. Um, let's see. I love that Venus Venus was coming to her Mars, and as we said before, she has the third house in Aries, right? So Mars is in control of her third house, and Mars is also in control of her 10th house. So Venus being in Libra, which is a big step up from Venus being in Virgo. It's just like imagine going from Cinderella to like queen status, right? Like that's kind of the transition in energy in a way from Venus and Virgo to Venus in Libra in terms of what Venus can give,
Right.
per se. So Venus in Libra coming to her Mars saying, I got you, hold on. Things are going to get better, especially in terms of your writing and in your public life and how you're seeing the world. And I will give you these Venusian things, including some income and maybe some accolades or praise or comfort in some shape or form.
Right.
And then Pluto had also moved in Sagittarius as well. So, like I said earlier, I mean, for all of you guys who were not around in the late 90s, Pluto and Sagittarius, if you think again about those Sagittarius themes of television, radio, film, broadcasting, podcasting, and I would say probably also the internet, because around this time, this is when the internet was really starting to take off. So the internet we know today is nothing to what the internet of yesteryear was. I would say, dial up, having to go to internet cafes or having to go to the library or AOL sending discs in the mail so you can have the internet. People starting to have websites of their own. Like I remember when celebrities or musicians were first starting to have their own websites and chat room forums, and all those things were kind of ushered in or really became more substantial when Pluto moved into Sagittarius. So I think this was a big shift for her because imagine how this changed the way she was able to market this book, right? At this time, I don't know around the time she did put it up, but she herself had her own website and she would update it talking about her progress with the books and, leaving hints and clues and, communities came out of this. Like this was a really transformative way of engaging with content and media, I would say. And for her, as someone with the midheaven in Sagittarius, this would have been a really big change, I think, overall in status.
Her midheaven's at 10 degrees, is that what it said?
Yes, 10 Sag.
Yeah, so Pluto was just catching its stride amidst the kind of rollout of all the books and movies.
So where do you want to fast forward to? Maybe the first film,
Yeah,
possibly?
I think we did look at those dates. Let me find it. Was released in November 2001.
No date?
November 16th.
November 16th, 2001. So let's see what's changed. Okay, so this is when astrology gets fun. So by November 2001, Pluto had already crossed her midheaven, right? And now the South Node is in Sagittarius, but also the North Node is in Gemini, right? So when you think about the fifth house, think about, yes, children, one, creativity, pleasure, fun, entertainment,
Mm-hmm.
right? So these were films that
Right.
were coming out based upon her book,
Mm-hmm.
right? Venus had crossed her Mars, but was still within orb. Let's see what else is going on. Where is the moon in her progress chart?
And the 12th in Capricorn.
12th in Capricorn. All right. Creative, also square to that Venus.
Mm-hmm.
Nice trying to all her Virgo planets. But I would also think a lot of business
Right.
too, like being very like about, all right, this is just the first film.
Right.
And the other books had not been released yet at this point
Mhm.
in time.
Yeah.
So I think at this point I think the first four books might have been out at this point in time. So she still had three more novels to go, and one book was out, you know.
Yep.
So
5 books were out, it looks like.
five books are out by 2020,
Oh
by
no,
2000.
2001, sorry. Why was I
Yeah.
thinking
Or
2004?
was it?
4, you're right.
So four books. So the first four books are out by 2001, and the first film was now being released.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm sure all of you guys know how big the Harry Potter movie franchise became, like
Huge.
mind-numbingly big. Um, so yeah, I think the moon in Capricorn would definitely speak to the fact, like, yeah, like now we have to be, now you're kind of an institution.
Right.
It's not just cute books. Now it's cute books and films and all that come with it. Right. So I do think there was probably a lot of serious behind the scenes conversations happening with her for her about how this was going to change her financially,
Totally.
even beyond what was probably happening for her right now. This is just the beginning of what was going to start coming in.
Mm-hmm. And then her
Uh,
moon
mhm,
will cross into the first house as everything is sort of really ramping up and getting momentum as well as the nodal return.
mhm, mhm. Let me see something here. I think it's also interesting to see in terms of the phase of the sun and the moon at this point in time. The moon is waxing or growing in light. And like you said just now, Jenna, this is on the way to the full moon. So
Mm-hmm.
this is not even the height of what she planted back in 1990, right? But we can see what is possible at this point in time.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's always fun to look at with people in their charts. It's like, what phase of the moon are you on? Like, where are we in terms of growing right now?
Yeah.
Because, if I see this and already I'm like, oh yeah, like we things are only going to get, things are going to increase basically. Um, Anything else? I
Mhm.
think we had spoken about this briefly. So yeah, while the North Node was in Gemini here, the South Node was in Sag.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
So there definitely were some questions around how this change in status for her was also changing her community or her friendships or the people that she considered her friendships. Like I don't know anything about JK Rowling in terms of the people that she considers her friends.
Yeah.
Like I don't know who her friends are. I mean, again, she has a private life. That's not, I'm not, I don't need to know. I'm not supposed to know, but it's interesting that I don't know because she is a very well-known public figure, right? So sometimes what the South Node can do, it can take away or kind
Mm-hmm.
of clear out a house. So, her friendships might have changed, people might have left her life. Maybe she found herself moving out of friendship circles into new friendship circles based upon her new financial status, right? Or her fame, per se. And also a big change in terms of who she is in the public world because of the South Node approaching her midheaven.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I think, a case where it's not always a negative per se, um, because at the same time, her natal Jupiter, who is the ruler of her midheaven, was also catching the North Node at that time. So I wonder if it was kind of a mixed bag situation, you
Yeah,
know.
I mean, the natal Jupiter has such harsh aspects too, though, so it seems like anything good that happens has a bit of a
Mm-hmm.
reverberation.
Mm-hmm. So it could be a thing where good things come with some baggage. Hmm. And she was also born with the South Node on her midheaven too. So that is definitely interesting.
Yeah, what do you make of that?
Mm, sometimes this can talk about if you believe in the idea of previous lifetimes, which I tend to believe in. Like, we've been around this earth numerous times and we just come back for more lessons and learning experience. If you believe the South Node talks about what we are familiar with, maybe it's possible that in previous lifetimes, JK has risen to some level of status. Um, and it's Jupiter. It's a Sagittarius Jupiter ruled midheaven. So it's probably come with a lot of abundance and a lot of, wealth and pleasure and all the Jupiterian things that come with it. But maybe there's something to that that can be toxic.
Right.
Um, it is Sagittarius. As you guys know, we are known to proselytize. We like to preach. Whether or not we're right or wrong, we believe that we have something to say and something to share with the world. So I think it's interesting that maybe it's just like, it's good to have status, but be mindful of how you use it because sometimes getting so high in the world can have its downsides, and maybe it's better for you to know to nurture your private life and your home life and your family as something that is equally as important. And it's interesting that all of these Virgo planets are in between these nodes.
Uh,
So, the things that she does, all of the really difficult, challenging things in her life have kind of fed into her rise in life. But I think they could also factor into her fall too, potentially.
um,
What do you think?
uh, I mean, we're bringing the past lives ideology into it. It's almost, it gives me this image of like, she chose to do it on hard mode this time, born into a life of poverty, and then she still was able to kind of
Mm-hmm.
mobilize that maybe past life knowledge or expertise or affinity to just kind of build a massive empire.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like she's definitely giving the rags to riches story, right? And I know over the years she has definitely donated or given a lot of her money away because I believe at certain points in time she had reached billionaire status, but had made a choice to give that money away and just be a multimillionaire, which is very generous of her. Like she could have chosen to hoard it and be like, "This is all mine." So, this is not to say that this person, she has positive qualities,
Right.
right? She has given back. She has been generous, right? We're just hitting a certain topic for her that seems to be part of her undoing in some shape or form.
Yeah. And then I know she keeps her like her husband and her children pretty private. She might be keeping these friends private that we don't know about. And so there
Hmm.
might be some of that leaning into the fourth house north node at this point in her life too. Kind
Hmm.
of like what you're saying, trying to find the value in the privacy and nurturing home and relationships. But who knows? All we see is her volatile
Yeah,
Twitter.
we're only at this point in time we're only seeing her public life or her public persona that she's putting out into the world. I think it's interesting that it's the midheaven in Sag ruled by Jupiter and Gemini, because Jupiter and Gemini is not necessarily known as being the best Jupiter to have because, it's a little bit scattered.
Not very demure.
Yeah, it is not very demure. All right. Like it's a lot of chatter sometimes. And as you were saying earlier, Jenna, like the fact that it's hit by Saturn, you know, it's hit by Pluto, it's hit by Uranus, and then out in the sky right now, it's hit by Neptune. So
Right.
this Jupiter is getting all the hits from
Total.
all the big baddies in the sky.
And Saturn's coming on its heels too. Yeah.
Hmm.
I don't envy
So
her
mhm.
for
I don't.
that in her chart right now.
I really do wish that she would just take a break and be like, you know what, like I have a good life. Like, why do I need to be doing? But again, maybe she feels like she's fighting a noble cause, right?
She must.
Um, Especially with this Mars and Libra, she just feels like, I must be the one to do this for women everywhere.
Right. I mean, with everything she's jeopardizing, she must believe in it, you know?
Yeah, I don't get the impression that this is just being an ass for the sake of being an ass. I don't think of it as trolling. I think of it more as like misguided bullying.
Right.
Like I think I'm right, so I'm just gonna keep fighting, even though people are telling me that I'm doing something harmful. Like I can't stop because I'm so fixated on what my belief is and who I think I'm protecting versus who I know that I'm hurting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, with all the eighth house planets, there might be something compulsive about it. It comes from some sort of trauma history, even not to excuse or explain away, but that
Hmm.
definitely seems like some emotional baggage with this sort of behavior.
She might also think like, hey, all the other times in my life where I persisted through the difficult times, I've been successful,
Right. A little bit
right?
complex.
Right? Like, and is she wrong? No,
She can
but
happen.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So for all we know, she might be thinking, F it. I know what I'm talking about, and soon they'll come around to seeing things my way. But we'll see.
Mhm.
All right, where do we want to jump to next?
Mm, I know there's so much between
I know.
2001 and now, but I feel like it peaked at some point and it's just been kind of simmering for a while.
Um, when did the fifth book come out? That must have been,
2003 for the fifth book.
do we have a date?
Order of the Phoenix. Let's see.
I'm thinking around the fifth book because there was a lot of anticipation for the
Yeah.
fifth book, for sure.
Oh yeah, she took like a 3-year break from release.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, it was July 21st, 2003.
I was just about to go to college. Yeah, I remember me and my mom going out at midnight to the stores to get this book
Mhm.
and me staying up all night trying to finish this book and my mom being like, go to sleep. Can you imagine?
Right.
Stop reading that book. Go to bed.
It was obsessive. I remember reading them
It
like
was obsessive.
multiple times through. It was,
Hmm.
yeah, so
For sure. It was super duper obsessive. It was super duper fun. It was a very fun community. So remember, in this time, again, we're still in Pluto and Sagittarius. There was a huge internet community that was building around this time, around these books, which I think we wanted to talk about too, because I believe there was some lawsuits that came up at certain points in time that we'll definitely get to, because I think that's going to be important in terms of what's happening now for her. And I think in that time that she took off, she had two more children, I believe.
oh, yeah, let me see if I can find children. Ta-ta-ta-ta. You keep going. I'm not finding it right now.
No, you're fine. So Pluto is still in Sag. Now it's retrograding, so her career, she's still on her ascent. There's still two more books. There are still several films to come. I think the third movie had probably come out around this time. So the film series was pretty much cemented at
Mhm.
this point in time. Um, I definitely think it's interesting that I think I said earlier that Pluto, Jupiter, Venus configuration she has going on in her chart is pretty solid because Pluto and Sag would be sextile to Venus, and then Venus would have been trine to Jupiter, and Pluto would have also been opposite to Jupiter. So this little configuration was just churning.
Her son was her son was born this year as well.
Oh yeah.
Regress moon.
Okay.
First house, the nodal
Mm-hmm.
return in the fifth.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Okay. So fifth house nodal return for a new baby. Nice. So, all of these really great things are happening in her career that allow for the opening up of other parts of her life in terms of family and children as well. Children can also be creative projects, haha, but but she had multiple creative projects going at this time, including the release of the fifth novel. And I'm just trying to remember at that time. Yeah, there was still a lot of hype around these films. It was just like, Harry Potter fever. It was just this thing. It was just this constant simmering. I remember magazines and, all sorts of fun things were happening. So, this is a really cool time, I would think, for her in her life. And we're still, in terms of lunation, the moon is in Aquarius. So we still have probably another, what,
2 years.
couple of years before she hits her full moon.
Yeah.
Right? So it just goes to show you how much things can change in a new moon to full moon cycle
Right.
for somebody. Okay. Anything else about this you want to talk about?
Mhm. No, let's find the full moon.
Okay, let's fast forward then to the full moon. I think I misspoke. It was actually a north node in her fourth house out in the sky. So expanding her home, additional child, that's all.
I was looking at the
And probably a bigger house too, to be quite frank.
right.
I don't know where she lives, but geez. All right, let's fast forward to her full moon, and that would have been roughly around probably 2006, August 2006. So this is kind of the peak of things, give or take, August, September, roughly, of 2006. Now, because the chart, the wheel is 360 degrees, and we have 8 lunar cycles or lunar phases, I should say. Each of those lunar phases are 45 degrees long. Each of those degrees is 1 month. So 45 degrees is roughly 3 years, 9 months. So just under 4 years inside each of these phases. So consider her full moon phase probably ran from about 2006 to probably 2010, give or take,
Hmm.
in terms of things being at their full peak. Okay. So yeah, 2006, I would think what films are still coming out.
Yep. She had her second or her technically her third kid in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
2, 3, 4 movies that came out during that time.
Mm-hmm.
She finishes the book series.
I think the book series was finished in what, 2007, I believe.
That sounds
think,
right.
think in the summer of 2007.
Yep.
So yeah, this is all just to show how things were flowing for her. I mean, that Pluto, Venus, Jupiter thing is still chugging along, right? So wealth is still wealthing. It's still growing because we still have a book and at least, I think, 2 more films to go at this point in time,
Hmm.
right? So this is just a show like how a dignified planet can really come through in a clutch sometimes and just be, I'm with you. I'm with you, friend, to help you along. Out in the sky, we are having the South Node in Virgo and the North Node in Pisces, which is interesting because this is what's coming up for her now. So
Mm.
this period of time in her chart, I think will be significant and will be very interesting to kind of do deeper research on in terms of what was happening, because this is coming back around now, but of course things have changed, right? She is no longer pumping out books and films at this point in time, right? Some of the glitter has gone, and we'll see that in the progress chart as to why that's happened. But at this point in time, I think you had mentioned before, Jenna, there was a lawsuit that had come out.
See if I can find when that came. Yeah, I remember it was about one of the Harry Potter fan sites put out a book and she sued them.
Mhm. So, as everyone knows, fan fiction is a thing.
Right.
I'm an avid fan fiction reader. So I love fan fiction because I think it's a wonderful way of keeping a fandom going even after the original material is finished sometimes, or after the original material has been butchered in some cases. Shout out to Game of Thrones. But in this case, this is saying like, this is my content, this is my intellectual property. You cannot use it to write a book, especially if you're going to write a book to make money off of it. That's the main issue, right? So it's one thing to write fan fiction and use my characters and use my, the world that I've built to have fun in. It's another thing to do that and then profit off of it. So if that's what happened, I can understand how she would sue and win it at that time.
Yeah, so the lawsuit happened in 2007, and the court held that the book was not a fair use of Rowling's material, but it did not prevent the book from being published in a different form. So it was kind of a win and a loss
Mm,
for her,
okay.
win and a loss for
In-
them. Mhm.
Interesting. Interesting. All right. So we'll definitely have to keep that in mind because now that she might have some lawsuits coming up now, I don't know if it's going to be a win and a loss again for her. It might just be a loss.
Mhm.
And
Well, it's interesting because uh with the North Node in well, with the nodes and on the Pisces Virgo axis, the
mhm,
Jupiter is squaring them, which we keep talking about is like the gift and the curse sort of
yeah.
thing. The gift with the baggage.
Now, what I would say is interesting about the 2007 lawsuit period, I don't have an exact date, but so Jenna's talking about these nodes, right? So it's in the house of her personal resources and the resources of others, right? It's hitting all of her Virgo planets. And then also at the same time, her natal Jupiter is in between this nodal situation, as well as her own natal nodes. So it is I think it's an important time for her in general. But at the time of this particular lawsuit, she had Jupiter on her side in the sky. So Jupiter was dignified in Sagittarius. It was probably on or near her midheaven. So, in terms of getting a favorable outcome for herself, I think Jupiter in Sag was probably giving her a lot more support in this regard. And the fact that, she was still riding high on a ton of fame and accolades and everything else going on in her chart and her life at that time, right? I think if it happened now, I don't know. I don't know what would have happened, but interesting stuff for sure.
We'll be
Um, yeah, what were you gonna say?
we'll be taking a look at
We
what
will we will be we will be watching for sure. Interesting that Saturn was in Leo at that time too.
Mhm. Just over
Hmm.
her son, yeah.
Hmm. I mean,
Or
technically, she is Saturn ruled as a person, as Aquarius rising, and the North Node would have been coming to her Saturn. So maybe this was, her kind of getting a lift in some ways, maybe, or being strengthened in some regard, possibly. I don't know, because at the same time, all of these other planets getting hit by the South Node, just not sure. I mean, ultimately, know that things panned out, but very curious as to what else was happening. Maybe there were some deals and contracts and other things happening around that time because God knows. I don't even think the theme parks were around at this point in time.
yeah.
If they were in the very early stages.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how much she even had to do with all of that.
Mhm.
At some point, I would, I imagine I would just check out. I'd be like, yeah, just
Just tell me, like, I'm assuming at this point she has lawyers and, like, business partners and people in the mix to help her manage all this stuff. But yeah, I'm very curious. I wish I could talk to her, like, hey, just tell me what's going on. I'm very curious.
facial our video and refute.
Hey, so we're kind of like, dissecting your chart. Great. So where would you like to go to now?
Well, let's see. The first sign of transphobia wasn't till 2018. So do we want to jump that far ahead, or is there anything else to look at between
Mm,
2000?
la. Actually, let's look at the last film, and I think I also want to briefly look at the magical creatures
Oh, right.
situation, because that's when I think things started to falter a bit for her in terms of like her immaculate, you know, uh
Perception.
perception, right? Because yeah, there were some things. Even I was just like, girl, what? I do not want.
So the last film came out November or July 15th, 2011.
Really?
I know, right?
That's really? Wow. Okay. Okay. So the biggest change I'm seeing right away with this last film was that Venus had left
Mm,
Libra.
mhm. You go into Scorpio.
So we went from Virgo to
Right.
Libra to Scorpio.
Detriment.
So Venus in Libra, she took a couple of steps down into Scorpio. Okay. Now, this is not to detract from people who have Venus in Scorpio. She's still a good Venus. She's just not as blessed, per se, in Scorpio. She's a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more reactive. Yeah, a little bit more possessive, we could say, possibly, a bit
Totally.
more intense,
Yeah,
dealing
I
with
think
loss.
Venus in Scorpio is sexy though. Yeah. The
We should definitely, yeah,
Mars.
we should definitely look at some Venus and Scorpio charts in the future, I think. Um, she's not all bad, but in terms of what she can give materially, it's not nearly as much as what she was able to provide with Venus and Libra. That's the main giveaway here. Okay. Okay, what else was happening? So that would also mean, to an extent, Pluto had moved out of Sagittarius and into Capricorn. So out of this really social house. I should also mention that the 11th house could also be a house of income too in a natal chart.
Mm.
So if the second house is like money you make like on your job per se, the 11th house can be money made from your personal business. So if you had your own, self-employed type stuff.
Hmm.
So when Pluto was in that house, he was like, yeah, he was talking to Venus, he was talking to Jupiter. He was like, yeah, I got you, right? So he moved out of the 11th house and now he's in the 12th in Capricorn. So it's a very different dynamic, I think. And now it's still talking to Venus though, but not so much to Jupiter. So maybe this was the transition of a little bit of a stepping down in terms of wealth or less coming in the way that it was before. We don't know. And maybe some measure of loss too for her. Like she finished the books in 2007 and now the films are finished. So this whole magical experience in her life as being this, she's still a world renowned author, but the is starting to wane, basically. And even in her progress chart, the moon is starting to wane now. So if we had that full moon in Pisces, now the moon has moved to Taurus. And now we are definitely starting to see the light of the moon starting to slowly decline,
Okay.
but it's still in good position. I think this is a waning trine.
Mhm.
So she's still able to use, her previous success in ways to still materialize good things for herself, right? And we see this because now this film is finished. now they had another project probably already in the back burner, or other things they're going to be using to make money and, to keep the Harry Potter legacy going, right? People still wear Harry Potter scarves and all sorts of fun, like it's a thing. It's a cultural zeitgeist kind of thing. It's not going anywhere. But in terms of her experience of it, this is probably when things are starting to slowly fade out.
Yeah, what a big fall, or not even a fall, but just like a sad thing to watch. And I would imagine.
Yeah. And also relationships too, I think would be changing. Like all those actors who played those characters for a decade of their life, and like 10 years is a long time to be on a project.
Yeah, there's probably some energy of like wanting to move on and not being stuck tied to the same story
Hmm.
indefinitely, but then all the losses associated with it, it's
Hmm.
complicated.
The nostalgia, the letting go, the endings. I'm sure all of that was a feature. Out in the sky at that time, this was the South Node in Gemini and the North Node in Sag. How interesting. So it's kind of like the ending of a creative project, but also like the culmination of a career element in her life. Like, so lots of attention of towards this being the end, probably. And where was Jupiter at that time? Jupiter was in Taurus. Okay. Interesting. Anything else you want to mention about this chart?
Mm.
I like that Saturn was in Libra in her ninth house. So again, kind of showing like the ending of this mass production, and also coming to sit on her Mars. So the ending of the story, right? The ending of this particular phase of her career.
Mm. Wow. That's also when Neptune had just gone into her second house.
Hmm.
So also, yeah, the money becoming funny.
Possibly, for sure. Um, and also I would think, you know, that Mercury, so remember that Mercury's so powerful in her chart, him ruling over the eighth house and also the fifth house. I would think Neptune being opposite to it might have been raising a lot of questions about what next.
Right. And a
You
little bit
know, maybe
cosmic.
some maybe some confusion, some questioning, now that this huge, massive project is finished, where do we go from here? And how is it going to impact me creatively and impact me financially? Or, I don't know. Are there any investors? Like who's invested in this stuff too? Like I would imagine to have such a massive franchise, there are a lot of people depending on the money that comes in through this particular work.
Mhm.
So even though I'm sure it was a very nice send off for the franchise and the series, I'm sure it definitely gave rise to a lot of questions. It might have been scary too. All right. Do we want to fast forward?
Fast forward.
So magical creatures and where to find them. Definitely not my favorite part of the franchise. And I
Don't know anything about it. This is when I started zoning out of the,
Yeah, I
the
get it.
JK.
Yeah, and we can see why, right?
Yeah, everyone's just kind of like over it.
So when did that series start to come out?
Let's see. It's weird it's not even listed in her Wikipedia page.
That's crazy. That's weird. It's like the ugly stepchild. Like, what is that? Like that's there were like two or three films out of there.
Let's see. The book was actually published in 2001. Is that right?
It's a smaller, like it's almost like a little, I don't want to say encyclopedia, but it's
Mm.
not a fiction book per se. It's kind of like all these magical creatures that she had created in this universe. And I think the character that went with it, Newt Scamander, was kind of a side character, not even in the novels. So, it's kind of like, here's this side character that I pulled into this thing, and now we're gonna make a whole franchise from it, which I don't think was probably the best idea. Um,
Uh,
my main critiques, go ahead.
The reason it's not in Wikipedia is because it's Fantastic Beasts.
Oh, see, look how much I value that particular part of that. I can't even
But
get
yes,
the
that
name
is it.
right. Sorry.
All good.
Sorry. My
So the
apologies.
deal happened in 2013, but the movie didn't come out till 2016.
Okay, well, let's jump to 2013 real quick. Okay, 2013. All right, so we have the North Node in her 10th house. So that's interesting. Yes, yes. So here's the node. It's on her Neptune. Okay, fine. Where is the progress moon? Progress moon is in Gemini now. Nice. So even though we're waning, we're still being creative. We're still working on things. Jupiter was in Cancer. Okay, interesting. So overall, there's still some prosperity and growth to an extent, or reimagining older material and making something that comes up from that, which can also be a time for the waning square. It's just like looking at your sword that you've already been using to like do things. Instead of making a brand new sword, just rework it, give it some sharpness, tend to the pommel or the handle of it, like add, use what you got to make something work. And I think this is what was happening in this case. Like, here's this book I wrote in 2001. Let's put a
Right.
little shine on it. Let's make something out of this and see what happens.
Yeah, it
And
is.
they were like, okay.
Right. It is a nice way to kind of close out a cycle is to like go back. It's almost like a Mercury retrograde phase of going back and seeing what can still be made use
Mm-hmm,
of or reapproached.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Interesting that her progressed sun was coming to her moon.
Ooh,
I'm
yeah.
not sure what that's about. Hmm. Hmm. Okay. We'll definitely keep that in mind.
hmm
Anything else about this chart?
Just feels like, yeah, this period of her life does have this sort of Neptunian signature,
Hmm.
like with the North Node on Neptune, and Neptune's kind of coming into opposition with all of her Virgo planets.
Mm-hmm.
Just seems a little foggy.
Yeah, it's like, what next?
Mm.
Now that that huge ship has sailed, now what do we do in the wake of it? And, how do we be creative about all these things? Okay, let's move to 2016. So, do we have a date for the release of the movie?
Mm, Says November. Let's see if I can get an exact. November 18th.
November 18th. So I went to go see this in the theater.
Okay.
I do remember that.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say. There might be some tweets about me being disappointed in that film. Okay, so now we have a nodal inverse.
Mhm.
South node in Pisces, North node in Virgo. Now, I don't know if this film was considered a failure per se. I think the fact that it's part of the Harry Potter franchise would still give it probably a ton of financial success.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised if it was a downgrade compared to what the previous films did financially and also critically as well. Because
Mm.
if I recall correctly, critically, I don't think it was nearly as well received
Mhm.
as even the worst of the Harry Potter movies. Um, And I think this South Node in the second house can definitely be talking about, oh, maybe the income that we were expecting from this did not pan out.
Mm.
And also I think that would have been backed up by Saturn in Sagittarius
Yeah. Squaring
coming.
Saturn too.
Hmm. So we had Saturn on her midheaven, and then we had Saturn squaring her Saturn and opposite her Jupiter,
Yep.
right? And also squaring all her Virgo stuff. Trident action there. So I guess this would have been a grand cross. Yeah, basically a grand cross. So if you just go like this and go like this, you got grand cross. Do, do. So yeah, a lot of tension maybe.
Yeah.
And I think around this time she had the original Harry Potter website had been reimagined or put back together under the name of Pottermore, I believe. So it was a little bit more flashy, a little bit more well put together. But at this time, she was kind of retroactively extending the universe that she had originally written. So Harry Potter is technically in the UK, right?
Mhm.
So across the British Isles. Now she was putting schools in different parts of the world and creating a what you call it, a background or setting up a universe in those different schools and what have you. So that's partially where, if not where the entirety of that film took place, was in New York City, because of that, part of the world that she created. But there were some issues around this time because there was a kind of a lack of cultural sensitivity that she was engaging in, especially with the indigenous population here in the States, where I think a lot of indigenous activists were like, yeah, please don't use our culture as, your art without proper research or, reference or even talking to us about it. And at this time, if I recall correctly, she was just like, I don't care. It did not seem like she was willing to listen to that critique or, whatever they were asking. It didn't seem like she was very willing to listen to.
Yeah. There
Yeah.
were signs. There were signs.
There were signs. Um, but I think that would make sense for what's happening in this chart. Um,
Mhm.
yeah. So I don't know. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, just kind of a callback to the sort of God complex we were referencing earlier. It's like she's trying to keep this universe alive, expand it, like really cement it into the echoes of history, and then like, yeah, is not really open to any sort of criticism,
Mm-hmm.
constructive or not, or sensitivity to what could be possibly wrong about what she's doing. Probably a nod back to that Mercury, Venus, Uranus
Mm-hmm.
happening.
In her natal chart. Um, Interestingly enough, Jupiter was in Libra at this time and crossing her Mars.
Yeah.
So, she was adding more to her lexicon and her universe to an extent. Um, but I kind of wonder in this case if this can be a situation where Jupiter is not always friendly,
Yeah.
especially as she is someone that has a Jupiter that's not always the friendliest or is not always mindful of itself at times. This is a trine. And so technically people see trines like, yeah, this is great, right? And it's just like, yeah, but it could also be like, adding ice to a slope. You may not want to go that fast. You may not want such an easy, ride because it could lead you into a brick wall.
Right.
So we have to be mindful about trines and sextiles because sometimes we're just like, yeah, we're going to get you to an ending real fast and there'll be nothing to stop us.
Yes. So she's not very demure or very mindful.
No,
Um,
unfortunately.
it's interesting. Her progressed sun was going over her moon, and now her progressed moon is going over her sun. That's like an interesting.
Oh, yeah. So it kind of feels like a double new moon, kind
Yeah.
of, in a
Mhm.
way, sort of.
Yeah, something's happening there.
Something's happening.
She's
It's,
maybe, yeah, finding her way out of the fog or
uh-huh. And
getting it.
where's Neptune? Neptune is opposite to Venus, roughly. Hmm. So
Yeah,
something's happening.
something is happening.
Something is happening. And also a Uranus opposite to her Mars as well.
Yeah.
Something being radicalized.
Yeah, something.
Are we being radicalized? If you guys in the comments know any dish, anything that we should know about what might have been happening. Oh yes, we know what was happening in 2016.
Oh, and there's a square to transiting Pluto too. Yikes.
We what's wrong with us? What was happening in 2016? Obviously, it was Trump and Brexit.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, there was this kind of conservative radicalizing going on in both the US and the UK around this time,
Mm,
right? Because I think Trump would have gone into office in 2017, and I believe Brexit was definitely going on at this time, where, the beginnings of it taking shape and form as a reality was really starting to hit around this time. So, as far as I know, a lot of wealthy UK citizens were kind of pro Brexit because of, a lot of times these things tend to benefit them the most.
yep.
They're not going to be harmed by closing borders or losing all of, freedom of movement across Europe.
Well, and if her money's all of a sudden not flowing as freely and she's starting to be more fearful there, at least less secure, that could
Hmm.
feed that flame too.
Hmm. And then receiving pushback from marginalized communities.
Yeah.
Sure. At the same time that your country is underneath this really intense, like, media assault of, propaganda, anti-immigrant, anti-queer, anti-everything, basically. It's so interesting. I feel like she kind of came to, or really gained power under this more quote unquote liberal time in the world, I feel like, between like 1998 to about what, 2011 ish, roughly. And when I say liberal, I mean like we were starting to be a little bit more progressive in terms of policy. At least we were trying. And then the switch might have started to happen around the shift in terms of Brexit,
Yeah.
possibly.
Yeah,
All right. Mhm.
she donated $1 million to the Labor Party in 2008, which is a more left of center. And then she kind of, by 2016, 2017, she said that her politics didn't align with them anymore
Fascinating.
because of their views on women.
Fascinating.
Another, yeah, piece of
Okay.
her.
Huh. Okay, so I think we can now jump to the commentary.
Mm.
Her first kind of turf transphobic commentary was in 2018, you said?
Yeah, it says in 2018 she liked a transphobic tweet in March 2018 and then said it was an accident.
Yeah. 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 Okay, well, right away I see there is the North Node in Aquarius in her first house
Hmm.
and the South Node in the seventh. So, South Node in the first house can definitely talk about kind of your self in a way being diminished energy wise, a weakening where you're starting to lean a little bit more on others because the North Node is in the seventh house.
Mhm.
Um, Needing more time to rest and take care of yourself could be a thing. But I'm very curious about who she was leaning on with these kind of opinions coming out. But now we know what the climate was at this time, right? This didn't happen out of nowhere, you know. What else was going on? Where is the progressed moon? The progressed moon was in Leo. So remember, when we first started our adventures with JK, the moon was in Leo and the sun was in Virgo. So we're kind of coming all the way back around, right? This is now what? How many years later? Um,
24?
is it
28?
28? Yeah, that would make sense, right? Because it's 14 years up and 14 years down, right? So, we've gone from new moon to full moon, and here we are now again getting ready for another new moon. So, this is also a releasing cycle for her at this time,
Mm.
making space for something new, but it doesn't always mean that what's new is necessarily positive or great,
Right.
right? It's just, it's
It's just
just isn't. Saturn is back in Capricorn, where he was when we first started the story,
mm,
right? Mars is there too, as is Pluto. This is a new addition, right? So sometimes Pluto can be unearthing some things that have been hidden away in the 12th house. So for her, it's just like, what's in the 12th house that's kind of now being dredged up to the surface?
right.
Things in her subconscious mind that she may not have been aware of before. Um, and it's ruled by this Saturn in Pisces.
Yeah. And
It's
also the square to her Mars in the ninth is like the belief system. It's
mm,
exposing
mhm,
or activating.
mhm. And it's loose, but there's also this Uranus. So there's kind of a T square going with this Pluto Uranus Mars situation in this chart, right? So this Mars also not in the best condition by sign,
Right.
right? It wants to be on both sides. It wants to, debate both sides of the equation. It's a little bit indecisive at times. But in this case, you know,
Check this out.
it picked a side. And we know that in this chart, this Mars is ruled by this Venus in Virgo, right? Who's also ruled by Mercury in Virgo. So this Mars is getting information in a way that, again, is falling back into that thing that we are talking about being very precise, very critical, very almost, it is what it is. There's no room for gray in this.
Mhm.
You know, I just kept feeling, I keep thinking about like, yes, it's perfection, but it's perfection born out of like stripping everything away to minutia, like the finest of detail. And this is only what is true, this seed, and everything else around it is just fluff. It's not real. It's not true. It's not what true, whatever the case is. In this case, womanhood is.
Right.
But I would think this is all being bolstered by the climate that was also at this time, which is a very conservative, very limited view of what society could be. Yeah. Anything else about this? We had Jupiter and Scorpio
Mhm.
on this Mars, so maybe some anger.
Yeah.
It's also Mars Neptune, um, which I'm wondering if it's like confusion about the fight.
Yeah. I think Sam Reynolds once described the Mars Neptune conjunction as like in a shooting contest, but you have like a bazooka. Like the aim is just too wide.
The aim is to everyone's gonna get hit.
Yeah.
Everything's gonna get hit or decimated, and especially it's Mars and Scorpio. So this is a very potent Mars to have,
Mhm.
right? And it's not getting any relief. When a planet is in its own sign, it doesn't get any relief or guidance from any other planet to kind of mitigate. So, sometimes it can be great and that it's superpowered, and then sometimes it can be awful that it's superpowered because it's just like you can't tell them anything. You can't tell them to stop because they feel so empowered in their own, energy that
Yeah.
you can't stop them, right? So if this Mars is in control now of this ninth house, that could be a problem.
Totally.
And Jupiter, he's like, yeah, yeah, rah, rah. More. Goonies never say die. Like,
In the wing.
yeah. So no, that may not be ideal. Yeah. And then the sun was getting ready to change signs too, which was also going to be kind of a step further down in a way.
Into the ninth.
Into the ninth. So now, the sun has a new focus. So going from being in relationship with others
Right.
to, kind of being possibly a thought leader or a preacher or someone who is constantly there talking a lot of shit. All
All
right.
coming into the mainframe. Yeah.
All right. Let's go to 2020 because I think that's kind of when
When she was
she
wanting it more. Yeah.
she was like, yeah. So this is when we started talking, being like, what's happening? So 2020, I think this is around the time that people were starting to really see like, oh, so you really do believe these things.
Yeah. It looks like June is the first time she outwardly tweeted like in support. June 6th.
Mhm. June 6th. What is going on? All right. So, first thing I want to say is that the sun is now in Libra. So, the sun in Libra is where the sun doesn't really care to be, right? So, if the sun is exalted in Aries and in domicile in Leo, in the sign of Libra, where it's opposite to Aries. So, think about springtime in the northern hemisphere, right? The sun is at it's growing, it's becoming hot again, right? Warmth is returning to the world. The sun is receiving the energy to be its biggest, brightest, hottest self. And we're going to get to that point in the sign of Leo. In the sign of Libra, it's like, no, 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 now it's fall. Now I'm losing my power to an extent. So this is a pretty big shift for her, I think, especially as a Leo sun, because there is some diminishment that's happening here on some level. And I think it's interesting that that's coinciding with the fact that this is when her reputation was starting to take more of a hit in terms of her ninth house beliefs
Hmm.
and her basically promoting them.
Right. And yeah, all the everything that her Mars underwent with Pluto and
Mm-hmm.
Jupiter, it's like it's all coming to meet together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Her
Oy. Mhm.
regress ascendant is coming up on her natal north node at this time, which is interesting.
Okay, so what do you think is going on there? Mm, well, I definitely think it's interesting. It's Gemini
Yeah.
versus Aquarius. And no disrespect to my Geminis, but sometimes you guys be talking to talk. I love you so much, but it's just hot air sometimes. It's like I just want to say these things sometimes to get a reaction
Yeah.
because it's meaning like sometimes it's like it's all just words, it's all just data, it's all just information. It doesn't mean anything. I'm not attached to it, right? I'm just the messenger. So I can say whatever and I don't have to necessarily care about what my words do to others
Right.
because it's just words.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
even speaking of talking just to talk, like even this idea just came to mind of like, what if this is her purpose is to like be this champion for a time with her public persona and influence. And then, I mean, in my mind, then I hope that she has this massive change of heart that can also reverberate. But it almost
mhm.
like with the ascendant meeting the North Node is like, no, this really is who she
This
is.
is what she is. Ah, yeah. That's a tough one to sit with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then sometimes the North Node too can be difficult, right? Where, in our desires to have and to be ambitious, where we can kind of run roughshod over everybody else, where such is about me and what I want and my desires and my aims and my accolades and me. The North Node is about consuming, you know, uh, receiving energy. So this could be part of it too.
Mm.
Where it's just like my words are the best words. Well, that sounds like the other Gemini who used to say that stupid stuff. Um, but yeah.
Mm. Mars is on her Saturn.
Mhm.
So yeah, just she's finally putting it all out there.
Yeah.
Been like 2 years of liking and unliking controversial tweets.
God, gosh. And now we're also seeing the South Node out in the sky is coming for her midheaven again. She's coming into her nodal return, of course. But I think we're seeing that theme. I think we spoke about earlier with that nodal south node on the midheaven. It's like you have all this fame and success and what have you, but maybe there's a price and a cost to it, and you could possibly lose it too.
Yeah.
Oh, not fun. Anything else?
Well, Pluto was trining her moon, which is interesting.
Hmm. Okay. Do you
Jupiter,
think
yeah,
that could be another radicalization situation, or the truth coming out about how she feels about womanhood and femininity?
right. Like taking her stand. Yeah.
Because Mercury was also there too
Yeah.
by progression, and the moon.
Yeah. Wow.
Interesting. I want to talk about women and how I truly feel. And I don't care what it does to my reputation. Interesting too is that her progressed Jupiter had moved into Cancer too. So this
Ooh,
is a better Jupiter by sign, as Jupiter is exalted in the sign of Cancer. So again, it's very abundant, but it is in the sign of Cancer, which is about womanhood and fertility. And, those are the traditional connotations of that Jupiter. In the sixth house, is this where I want to be of service?
yeah. I guess she doesn't have much else to do.
Yeah, I don't know what was happening with those other films. As far as I know, was it Fantastic Beasts? Was that what it is?
Uh-huh.
Fantastical Beasts?
Yes.
There was some controversy because remember Johnny Depp had been in one of the films at one point in time, and so I don't think that venture ultimately gave to her what the original Harry Potter series gave.
Mm,
But I think that obviously coincides with timing in her life, you know.
totally.
Okay. Are there any other periods of time that we want to talk about before we get to present day?
Let's see. I have a timeline of all of her nonsense. Uh, well, this was the same time, but Daniel Radcliffe also speaks out against her right around here, which is
Mhm.
interesting. Wondering how that showed up.
I mean, who
Maybe
would
that is
he
the Mars conjunct Saturn thing again.
maybe, but who would he be in her chart? A colleague?
I
Would
mean,
he be
more than that.
seventh? Would he
Yeah.
be seventh house person?
It's almost like her child in a way.
Right? Huh. Well, okay.
Yeah.
I guess it could be a little bit literal in this case. Okay, so if we say that Daniel is her child, technically,
hmm
then he would be through the fifth house, and
hmm
then he would be what, Mercury in this case?
Could be with some
So
harsh aspects. I mean, that being
Mercury, so Mercury progress chart is at the moon, and in the sky, where is Mercury? Mercury's in Cancer. Hmm. Hmm.
yeah. Yeah.
If he is, if
Her-
he's a colleague, would he be in the 11th house?
Mm.
I wonder if he would be more 11th house in this case, especially with the South Node
hmm
going through that house
hmm
and kind of the loss. I mean, I guess at this point it's officially a loss because I think she's tried to come out again to like force him to be on her side, and he's just like, nope, not doing it. um, but if that's the case, he would have been Jupiter in Capricorn with Pluto,
Mm.
kind of like the secret enemy in
Yeah.
a way, coming out against her stance.
All of a sudden, not so secret. And here
Yeah, like suddenly we're not friends because I just don't agree with you on this point.
I am.
Because as far as I know, Daniel Radcliffe has done a lot of work with the trans community and trans teenagers in particular. So he's just like, no, I can't meet you there. I haven't really seen her talked to the other two co-stars. I think it's Rupert Grint and Emma Thompson, I believe. I don't think she's ever really dragged them into it, so I don't know how they get on. But she and Daniel, I think because they're both Leos, so I guess maybe she's like, "Why don't you side with me?" And he's just like, "Can't do that, man."
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So,
Well, so then the whole year, like all of 2020, the fan sites start distancing themselves from her. She has to give
mhm,
back an award she got after being
mm,
condemned for her statements.
mhm,
So there's a lot going on. Looking at Saturn opposing her sun.
yeah. Okay, so this was a very significant time for her then. Saturn opposite Sun, Jupiter, Pluto conjunction in the 12th house,
Mm,
um, South Node in the 11th, which, so the last time the South Node was in the 11th, we were questioning who her friends were
right. Yeah. Still question.
because, yeah, we were still questioning, but we were questioning it for different reasons because this was the last time it was there was around the time that her success was just starting to take off.
Hmm.
I think this is around the first book, I think, or the first film, probably the first film
Yeah.
had come out around this time. Okay. I guess the big difference, if we were to go back in time, would be, probably Jupiter's placement at that time. Now I'm curious. Let's go back real quick. Real quick, let's go back to 2001. All right. So 2001, end of 2001, we would have seen, here we go, if it's around this time, where was Jupiter? Jupiter was in Cancer. Very different experience.
Sheesh.
So you can see the difference. So even back in 2001, right? The South Node was in her 11th house. It was coming for her midheaven. It was probably talking about a lot of change coming in terms of her status, right? Probably as a newly minted billionaire or millionaire or whatever the heck was going on in her life. Who was her social circles, blah, 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 blah. But because Jupiter was in Cancer at the time, and so much more forgiving and abundant and friendly in terms of what Jupiter can do in that sign, she was receiving awards, probably,
Yeah.
as opposed to being asked to return them. So when we fast forward, to 2020, where we're having the same transit, but the response is so different, is because the ruler of this transit is in a much worse condition.
Yeah.
He can't help her. He can't. He
Oh,
won't. And he's with Pluto. He's like, all this has to die, basically.
yeah.
You know,
Nice.
that's funny. Not really, but it's just
Yeah.
astrology. And at that same time, we had Mars in Aries retrograde.
Yeah.
So when Uranus was going through there was this radicalization, I think, starting to happen,
Mhm.
especially when it hit her Mars. But
That
now
transit,
Mars is there. Mm-hmm.
that transit really long.
It was. But I
Jeez.
guess it must have really hit its peak um, during that pre-Brexit time. So if we go back to 2016, give or take, roughly 2015, 2016, it would have been just opposite, plus Pluto. So it wasn't just one thing,
Right.
it was a lot of different things, but I think this was the radicalization. I'm just like, but why? Well, again, maybe it just speaks to how propaganda can really work on us,
Yeah.
you know?
Tying it back to the mother issues, I think it's just like something that
Mm-hmm,
sensitive spot for her that can be exploited, probably.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so now, present day. So
Yeah.
basically, it's just gotten worse. She hasn't, since 2020, it has just been this with her.
I mean, in August 22, she published a book about a character being accused of transphobia. I think I heard about that. I kind of
Was
remember.
this the book that she released under the male pen name?
Let me see. Yep. The ink book.
Fascinating. I don't know what that's about.
The book takes a clear aim at social justice warriors and suggests that the character was a victim of a masterfully plotted, politically fueled hate campaign against her.
So was the character transphobic or not? Because clearly we can see that this book is about her. So at the time of that book coming out in August of 2022, correct? We
Mhm.
had the South Node in Scorpio. So, this is another kind of ding to her public persona.
On
Um,
Progress Neptune. Interesting.
Neptune was directly opposite to her moon.
How much Neptune in the last
It's a
10
lot
years?
of Neptune. Well, Neptune can really
Yeah,
loosen things up in terms of our boundaries, our sense of self. It can really make things confusing a lot of times too, where we
yeah,
just don't know where we stand on things, and the things that used to be concrete for us are no longer, and it can be really disorienting.
totally.
Not to say that she's disoriented, but it wouldn't be outside the bounds of reason if she did feel that way. And this is her struggling to make sense of what she believes in now, or what she thinks she believes in now. I don't know.
What she thinks she believes. Yep.
Saturn in the first house
Mm-hmm.
is going to be coming for that Mercury pretty soon.
Yep. And it's squaring her progressed Mars almost.
Hmm. Yeah. And then also kind of squaring her Neptune.
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of things about reality. What is
Right.
real? What is not? What do I believe in? My image.
Yep.
So I definitely think this is definitely doing a lot of damage in its own way to her image for sure.
Absolutely. Hmm.
I don't think the book was particularly successful as far as I know. Because I think at one point it was revealed that it was her, pen name. And but prior to that, no one really cared about the book
Mm.
as far as I remember.
Yeah, it's such a 180 from like taking her personal trauma and like doing something generative with it versus then like taking her personal hardships and just spinning it into like woe is me, pity,
Hmm.
whatever.
Hmm. She's still technically in a new moon phase.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, the moon is in Libra, progress sun in Libra as well. Um, but we can see it's in the ninth house. So this is a lot, it's a new moon, a new chapter around her philosophies about the world.
Yeah.
And, it's Libra ruled by Venus. The progressed Venus is in Scorpio, and it's on top of Neptune
Mm-hmm.
with the South Node with it. So it's just like, are these beliefs grounded in reality, or are they coming from a place of rejection and fear, which could also be a thing with Scorpio sometimes. It's just like, I need to align myself with power so that I will never be rejected or tossed aside. So is there possibly some fear around these views? I think so. If she feels like women are all of a sudden at risk because there are trans women amongst us. This is like, but trans women have always been amongst us. So I'm not sure how them becoming accepted in society is now a threat to you. You don't lose anything. And I think that's what we were talking about before. It's like, what do you lose
Yeah.
in trans women being accepted as women? You don't stop being a woman.
Right. Well, kind of coupled with her other insensitivities towards like the indigenous communities and other people of color. Like it could also be something about like whiteness, fear of
Mm,
being like losing her power, her stance, or her voice,
mhm. Hmm.
especially with
Interesting.
all the Sagittarius. Yeah.
We all get our knocks here, guys. Okay. Anything else about this particular period of her life?
No,
Um,
bring it
Jupiter was in Aries, so she definitely felt like empowered to talk again
Oh, and well,
around with
a
that
little
new
before
book.
this. But yeah, it was like opposing her progressed son, maybe while she was writing it or
Hmm. It's interesting that she chose a male pen name. It's just like
yeah. What happened to solidarity with women?
fascinating. Just the things that we do. Okay, let's come to present day, unless you have anything else you want to touch upon before we get to today.
Let's bring it on.
Let's bring it on. Okay, so we had the Olympics a couple of weeks ago. Roughly what? Is it Leo season, I want to say, give or take? So JK has been pretty steady about her transphobia for the
Mhm.
past 2 to 4 years.
For sure.
Pretty like to the point where I've muted her on Twitter because I'm just like, I'm so tired. Like it's just it seems pretty relentless at this point. And she doesn't seem to be backing down. And she seems to have kind of acquired a new fan base in a
Yeah,
way, where it's less about her, it's really less about her former readers,
right.
a lot of whom I think do fall into more marginalized communities, believe it or not, and more about this new base of people who are women who feel similar to her. Well, I'm very curious if they would fall into the more conservative Brexit MAGA camp on this regard.
Mhm.
I don't know. I would be very surprised if they are more left leaning because I just don't know if those politics would align with this perspective per se.
I think that's a yes.
Kind of a fair guess, I would. Um, so yeah, here she is with her new friends. And they are very adamant about kind of, you know, being relentless about this topic and not listening to anyone or any kind of reason. So, as we said at the beginning of the show, during the Olympics, there was a female boxer who, through, I want to say disinformation,
Mhm.
because first it was the fight where the Italian boxer, cried about being hit, which I thought was weird because, ma'am, you are a boxer. Boxing in the Olympics, getting hit in the face, I think, is part of, yes, the job. Anyway, the fact that Iman Khalif is a woman of color, she's from, I believe, Algeria. She is not afforded any of the privileges that I think a white woman would have in this situation. Um, she has been in previous Olympics and previous fights, but in this particular case, if you guys want to, there are some videos that dig into how this kind of came about. And there is I think, a disbanded Russian boxing organization that basically questioned her gender after she beat a Russian boxer.
Mhm.
And this particular organization has a history of kind of being corrupt in that regard, that, favoring their boxers and that kind of stuff. And they have not provided any proof about whatever gender or sex test they had given her. So again, it's basically a rumor that ran wild, and JK Rowling and Elon Musk latched onto it, and here we are. Um, so yeah, she might have created this situation based on a lie,
Right.
you know. Um, so in terms of her astrology, in
10th
terms of her,
house lit up.
huh?
Progressed 10th house is lit up in Scorpio.
Yes. there's a lot of activity happening in her progressed 10th house, including the progressed moon, but also Mars, Neptune, and Venus. And Venus is now directly on this natal Neptune too. Right. So there is a lot of like just haze around these feelings around womanhood and femininity in general, I think, for her.
Mm.
And it's Martian. It's ruled by a Mars who is superpowered and unwilling to relent. He's also dealing with Neptune by trine. So again, like we said earlier, trines are not always positive, but he is super juiced up and very much fighting this, what seems to be almost like this imaginary fight.
Yeah.
Because out on the street, my experience as a cisgender woman, I am not coming across trans women and feeling threatened or in any way hurt.
100%.
You know, and I please in the comments let me know, like, has your life suddenly been altered by the fact that trans women are having any kind of rights or protections under the law, which I don't even think they really have at this point in time.
Yeah, they're being taken away more than,
Yeah, there's
yeah.
still a super marginalized, super attacked, population. And JK has not been helping them in any shape or form. If anything, she's painting an even larger target on their backs. So there's kind of like this fight that's just not really a fight. It's like a fight that she's having with herself, but hurting others at the same time. Um, the South Node has been in Libra.
Mm.
It crossed over her Mars. So we know it's kind of vomiting up all sorts of stuff. And also the North Node is in her third house. So I'm extra chatty, right? I am right. My ideas are correct, right? And I'm going to release all of these really aggressive ideas that I have about Venus into the world. I'm having my Saturn return,
Yeah.
right? So whatever responsibilities I feel around this stuff, don't actually care. What do you think her Saturn responsibility is, though? I know Saturn and Pisces people tend to have a lot of have a lot of responsibilities around art, one, but
Mm.
also not being deceived.
Right. In the second house, the main responsibility around her values, even. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah,
Pisces, yeah, idealism, like fighting for the underdog, which she has a history of, but in this case, she's
she's
moving the
not.
plot. Yeah,
Mm-mm. She is not. She is definitely in her Dolores Umbridge bag right now. um, she's also having her Jupiter return,
right.
or the beginnings of it. It will probably be exact sometime next year.
Yep.
So I do wonder how much of this is reigniting some stuff for her around her mother's passing and all the things that come up around, motherhood, womanhood, femininity for her.
Right. Thinking
So,
about
mhm,
how she was sort of possibly radicalized during the sort of Trump Brexit era, I am also curious to see what will happen when Uranus moves out of Taurus once and for all, because
mhm,
that has seemed to kind of coincide with that whole,
mhm,
yeah.
yeah,
Partly.
mhm.
And then
Historically, yeah.
moving out too, like I'm really curious to see like 2025, 26, if the fog just somehow lifts for her. It,
Especially when Uranus gets to her North Node-ish.
mhm. Could
Hmm.
be wishful thinking, but
Which, I mean, we'll see because, like you said, that Uranus moving into Gemini would also activate all of this Virgo and Pisces stuff for her.
hmm.
Um, but we'll have to see for sure. It's we don't know just yet. Uranus can go either way. Sometimes it feels like,
Hmm.
it's still a lightning bolt. You just don't know how people are going to respond to it. Historically, Uranus and Taurus has a lot to do with thinking back 80 years ago. It's crazy that, we're seeing all of these themes coming back into the world, around labor rights and, class warfare, around Nazism. The First World War was winding up during Uranus and Taurus the first time around. So that same kind of conservative um, value situation was coming around, especially in regards to those people have things that we don't have, and so therefore they must be the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
They took from us our glory, so we must reclaim it. So I don't know if JK is having that kind of situation where she feels like trans women are somehow taking from her glory as a woman. I don't know, but I think it would still fall underneath that same umbrella of, scarcity mindset in some ways.
Right. Especially considering like that her rise to fame kind of hinged on her story of this single mother in poverty, and how like as she's kind of experienced the fall of that story, like there's like this maybe like striving to be important or relevant still in
Mm-hmm,
some
mm-hmm.
way that's just falling flat.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's been helpful that Mars has been in Gemini too
Yeah.
for her, and crossing her nodes and coming to her Jupiter, which I think it just funnily enough, I think Mars just crossed her Jupiter probably yesterday when she finally came back to the internet after taking a bit of a break. So basically she bullied Iman Khalif for a couple of weeks during the Olympics. And then she took 2 weeks off. There were rumors that said that she had deleted some tweets, but people have said that that's not the case, that the tweets about her are still up. But yeah, if if she came back yesterday, then Mars was at 23 Gemini, right on her Jupiter. So she's like, no, no, I'm committing. I commit to this stance. I'm not backing down, basically.
Uh,
Yeah,
I have to run and go grab my charger. Do you want me to pause the recording?
sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, Thinking of the timing of Neptune and Uranus changing signs, I wonder if that'll be when the eclipses are hitting her sun finally.
um, let's take a look. Pull it up. So the first eclipse in Virgo is going to be September 17th.
Mhm.
So let's back up to that real quick. There we go. That's good. That eclipse is going to be right on her moon, in her chart. So again, kind of whipping up this origin story for her.
Mhm.
She's
Mhm.
going to be coming into a Jupiter return. I don't know if it's going to become exact before Jupiter retrogrades. Let me see. I don't know. I'm not sure how far Jupiter gets before he turns back around, but it's close enough. Um, mm, but it's still within this third house, ninth house stuff. So she's probably not going to stop. I will say the fact that it's a ninth house south node, I wonder how that's going to impact her legally
Right.
already. Maybe Venus being in this house will give her some reprieve. Um, but I feel like because Mars is going to be in Cancer for an extended amount of time, it might just fuel this third house to be silly. And I believe this Mars gets pretty close to her sun. It gets within 2 degrees of her sun because Mars is going to get up to 6 Leo before he retrogrades back into Cancer. So I think she's going to feel somewhat emboldened to keep it up for a while.
Yeah, definitely.
But I don't know how that's going to play out in the long term because that legal case,
Yeah.
if that case with Iman Khalif goes forward, these eclipses are going to be all over JK Rowling. with her eighth house.
Yeah.
Um, Jupiter will be in Gemini, so not necessarily very helpful for her in terms of her career or her public standing.
Oh, her
Her-
moon, progress moon changes signs right there.
okay, so the progressed moon will be going into Sag. I'm not sure how helpful that will be. Maybe she will find some community to help her during this time. I'm kind of concerned that it's going to be crossing the South Node, so it could speak to more loss of public standing and public support, even with women, I would say too, could be a possibility.
Very, very possible.
Mm, she's still going through her Saturn return. That
Mhm.
Saturn is still going over all of these Virgo planets, and eventually it's going to hit this moon. So that can definitely speak to a challenging time emotionally for her, where things may not be going to plan. Plus the South Node going over the moon too. Like this is not ideal.
Not ideal.
Not ideal. Pluto will be starting to oppose her sun. It's not going to be exact, but it's still going to be within orb and waxing, so tightening up.
Mhm.
So she will be feeling that. Um, Eventually, Jupiter will move off into Cancer. So I'm wondering, again, we don't know when this case is going to, ever get the light of day or reach a court, or we don't know how the time is going to play out in terms of that. But just in general, in terms of her life, there's a lot of stuff going on that would speak to like things are a little bit difficult for her. Um, so even if nothing happened during this particular eclipse cycle, it's still pretty heavy for her. Um, so, and then let's say things don't start moving until things get into Leo, it could
Right.
still speak to a difficult time in terms of legal situations.
Yeah. There's a solar eclipse at 10 degrees Leo in August of 2027.
Okay. August 2027. Okay, yeah. Let's see. So that would probably be around here.
Mm-hmm. Second, yeah.
So August 2nd-ish,
Oof.
August 1st-ish. So let's say around August 2nd, give or take. Yeah. Um, so a south node eclipse on her sun,
Mhm.
Mars on her progressed sun, Pluto opposite her sun. Yeah.
This is my
Uranus.
prediction.
What
For
happened?
if she turns it around, this is my prediction for the timing.
Jupiter coming to her Mercury.
Yeah.
So maybe some enlightenment. Yeah, so overall, her chart is kind of going through some things.
Yeah.
So I think she's coming into a phase where, I don't mean this to be judgmental, but it's a little bit of a reckoning in some ways,
Mhm.
where she has to sit with the consequences of her actions, and it may not be pleasant.
Right.
Because imagine how many people have been endangered or hurt, and not just hurt like, oh, my feelings are hurt, but more like, no, like now things are more dangerous for me to be outside because now people see you with 14 million followers and all this success and all this money and all this fame behind you to kind of give you gravitas or, some seriousness, and people are listening to you, and it makes my life more difficult,
Mhm.
right? So it could be a situation where she has to sit with that or actually feel the impact of that in her own world. And I don't know if it will be enough to help her switch out of this. It might make her double down more
Yeah. Yeah, because where's the progress moon? It's in
in
Cancer.
Capricorn now in 2027.
Yeah. So it's closer. Well, no. Yeah. Still a long way to go in that story.
Mm-hmm. So, um, fortunately, unfortunately, JK is still working through her stuff. I would prefer her to do it in her therapist's office rather subjecting the public to this. But, I'm of the belief that everyone is adding to the collective story.
Sure.
Um, and I guess through her, there are people who are rising to the occasion of the fight that she's giving
Mhm.
and being like, no, this is not correct, or this is not how we want to live. We do not want to live in a world full of Death Eaters run by Dolores Umbridge. So, no. um, it's funny. I'm going back to her fifth book. Is it I Will Not Tell Lies, is what was being written. Do you
Mm.
remember that in the books? Listen, twisted. I mean, maybe we should really talk about some of the themes in that book because I think someone pointed out like this book was really abusive towards children.
Yeah.
Like the
Well,
things that were happening.
there might be more clues there too. Yeah.
Things were really kind of twisted in that book. Like, I'm gonna write on this piece of paper and it's gonna be etched, carved into my skin. God. Yeah. So I don't think that's gonna happen to her per se, but it might be something similar that gets the message home that you have to be a little bit more mindful about your commentary and the impact that it has on the larger world. And maybe things aren't as black and white as you think they are.
Mhm. Yeah, lesson for her, Mercury,
Hmm.
which will
But
be getting the square by Uranus.
hmm yeah, maybe there will be an aha moment for her during this time, in the next couple of years, when, like you said, Uranus comes to square her Mercury, and then also after the South Node
Yeah.
crosses over that Mercury, maybe she will have a moment of like, oh, okay, or not.
I'm listening, I'm learning.
I'm listening. I'm listening. I'm learning, or not. Well, time will tell. I hope so, because I
Yeah.
would imagine that would make things a little bit easier for her if she was interested in listening and learning and not being a bully to a whole segment of people
Yeah.
who already have it very bad and difficult, you know? So
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there anything else you want to add to this tale?
I'm just looking at the progress moon at 0 degrees in the 12th house and wondering if there's sort of a dark night of the soul that could be happening. I guess I'm just rooting for her to not be an evil troll.
I'm rooting for her not to be a Death Eater. I'm rooting for her not to be fucking Voldemort. That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah.
But yeah, she has free will in all of it. She doesn't have to do anything she doesn't want to do. That's her story to tell and her karma to bear. Really,
Right.
this might be the kind of thing that completely dissolves all her great works in some ways because talking about her and her work automatically brings first, as
Mhm.
opposed to all the really fun, delightful things we enjoyed, in the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, imagine if that whole legacy just like poof disappeared. That'd be wild.
And it could,
Good, I agree.
it could. And
Hmm.
it wouldn't be anyone's fault but her own.
Right. I mean, yeah, if you think of like the children's book legacies of old, like maybe the authors were problematic now, but at their time they were relatively like going with the flow, and she's doing the opposite of becoming like more problematic as
Hmm.
goes. So
I,
that would be,
I'm thinking of, was it Roald Dahl?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. But I'm sure, listen, no one's perfect, right? So I don't want people to think that either you and I are in some glass tower, like we're so great and perfect and all our views are amazing. It's like, no, of course not. But these are just really interesting case studies
totally.
to see how people can have such success and such fame and all these great things, and then something happens to like turn or twist, in their mind, and it creates a situation that starts to damage that for them,
Mhm.
you know?
I'm just thinking about that South Node midheaven conjunction of like this cautionary tale.
Hmm. I don't know if it's Icarus. I don't know if it's flying too close to the sun per se, or how would you describe it in this situation?
Yeah, like something about the career, clinging to the career or to the public persona is like contributing to her downfall sort of thing. Maybe more like Narcissus in the lake.
Maybe. It's possible. It's very possible. You know,
Yeah,
there's Mhm.
with Icarus that speaks to like her Mercury
Mm,
X, and then Narcissus is like the sun and the her sun, yeah, her sun's relatively unaspected except for Neptune.
that's
Interesting.
true. That is interesting. So sometimes with unaspected suns, I've seen, because there's no aspects from other planets to give the sun shape to its identity, that when other people step into the ring with the sun will latch onto their aspects.
Mhm.
So, when I keep asking who are her friends, who are her people, with a sun that's so barely tethered, and the planet it is tethered to is Neptune of all planets, it's probably given her this beautiful imagination that she's used to write her novels. Wonderful, right? Very creative, very artistic, very talented, but Sun Neptune can also be led astray, where it's just like, depending on who you're hanging out with, you start to absorb their ideals, their views, their ideas about the world, and kind of run with it. So there's almost like a lack of firmness to the ego with the Sun Neptune, and it's barely there with an orb. It's like 2 degrees away from being like, this is barely an orb, but it's loose enough to
Yeah,
be there, but loose enough into a planet that's just like, you don't know what you believe in, but they do,
yeah.
right? Um, and the fact that all of this kind of shift in her character and politics really happened around Brexit really speak to how impactful it was to her. Because remember, it was Mars that was being radicalized, and Neptune is ruled by that Mars.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, it just seems like she's possibly easily influenced, like you're saying.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if at this point in time there's going to be people around her who are going to be able to influence her in the opposite direction. We'll see. Um, but yeah, I guess good luck to her in finding a path that's less destructive.
Live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Right? No. Uh, oh man. Well, if you have nothing else to add, I'm kaput.
Uh, We've exhausted all options.
I'm so tired. I think ending on that Sun Neptune kind of drove it all
Yeah.
home. Maybe that was and that's the thing about Neptune aspects I find sometimes with looking at them in charts. Like, even if they're dead in the center of your face, you don't always see them right away. Because Neptune's like, no, all those things are no, look over there. Yeah, that Sun Neptune may be the real driver of a lot of this stuff,
Yeah.
backed up by all the other things that we spoke about. But if this is just a case of like, I've been taken over by new ideology, yeah.
We gotta find all the Horcruxes to
I know.
free
Oh
her from this
no.
spell.
Oh no.
I know.
How do we even begin to find them? All the tweets. All the tweets we have to destroy
Yeah.
to help break the curse, to set her free.
Free,
God.
free JK.
Free JK from the Brexit disease. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, ma'am. This was so much fun.
Having me. I had a great time.
I would love to have you back if you want to talk about another chart, or, you
Absolutely.
know, add your 2 cents and your therapy to it, and all for it. Because, I mean, here's a question. And you don't, obviously JK is not your patient, but if someone like her did come to you, what do you think would be the first step to helping her?
Well, that is the harder thing to see from a chart. But if we're thinking of some of the issues that we're discussing, of like a loose sense of self, over rationalization, over reliance on the intellect, then it is really about like getting her back into her body, like connecting with her emotions, processing whatever the past trauma is with the mom. I mean, um this is just a guess, but like seeing the sun square Neptune, maybe there was some substance use with dad, and then a lot of times in these sort of dysfunctional family systems, one parent gets vilified and the other one gets idealized, but everyone's complicit. And so that could even reflect on like her women issues, is she's like not really owning the hard aspects of her relationship with her mom and projecting it all towards the father. So it's really just kind of like bringing the whole perspective of what her childhood was like and what her upbringing was like, to kind of get out, break free from some of this black and white, like all or nothing thinking.
I think that's a great start. Honestly, I wish she would come see you because we all need a break. We didn't talk about Iman Khalif's chart. Maybe another time.
Yeah.
But I do wish her a lot of wealth, health, and support in the aftermath of all this, because I can't imagine how difficult it must have been for her to be in the Olympics competing and having people basically bullying you online. And she's from a nation where it's illegal to be transitioning to either gender. So, how dangerous it could have been for her,
Yeah.
in addition to the fact that for her to even be a boxer, all the misogyny that she had to overcome to even get into the position of going into the Olympics, you know. So, respect to her, respect to all the athletes, cis and trans. Everyone deserves to be here. And I feel like hopefully we get to a period in time in our humanity where we're not acting like this. Because, we have much bigger fish to be fucking frying, girls. Like, climate change is real.
Literally fried fish.
Microplastics are a thing. So I'd much rather us be using our intellect and energy towards solving the issues that hurt all of us rather than hurting each other needlessly. That's all. I'm a Sag. I'm hopeful, needlessly optimistic.
For even JK Rowling to exist in this way with these beliefs, that means an equal and opposite kind of stance exists as well. And just got to keep pushing
Keep
toward.
plugging along. Uh, but if you're tired, it's also fine. Take a knee and come back to it. We'll be
Yeah.
here. Well, ma'am, it was a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for coming on, and I hope you come back. And thank you to everyone for listening. We hope you'll return and see you next time.
Ow.
Bye.